Hey, this is Patrick with Top Tier Top Lane Guides, and I just rambled for 16 minutes talking about the difference between NA and EU, and decided to scratch the whole thing because it went on a little bit too long. Um, Plus, I said some unsavory things about streamers I've had to play with, and I don't want that to be my my channel's. I don't want to ever take off because some streamer gets word of a video of me saying they're a piece of shit. Not exactly my words, but anyway, I don't want that sort of thing to be why I get popular if I get popular. I want to take the high road on that one. So I have had the pleasure of playing in NA and EU for about, well over 2 years each. For those of you who don't know, I grew up in Florida back when the NA servers were in California. I played on about 110 ping for the first few years of my League of Legends career when I was much younger. Started in Season 2. Then around the time of the server move, I think maybe a little bit after, definitely a little bit after, but just a little bit, I went backpacking for 2 years through Europe and the Middle East. Sorry, not 2 years. I've been gone for over 2 years, but about 2 years ago, I went backpacking for 6 months in Europe, and was not playing League of Legends then, and that's been normal. I've taken lots of breaks. But then and I was not coaching either. I was traveling largely off the money I made coaching, but at that point I had decided that I was done with League of Legends at the time. So anyway, I traveled for a while, and then I decided that I didn't want to live in the States anymore. Came back to the States temporarily and managed to play some in NA. Then I went back. I tried to live in Berlin for a while. Played in Berlin just a little bit because I had a hard time finding a reliable connection. That happens when you're moving around a lot and you don't have a real apartment. And now I'm living in Lyon, France, with an apartment that is mine and a visa and everything I need to stay here. And I've been playing on the US servers pretty much nonstop for the past 6 months, outside of a few week visit to the States. When I was in Florida, at some point, I played for a while on the Latin America North servers because, and when I was backpacking in Guatemala, I actually took a weird hiatus where I actually played a lot of League on my laptop in a place we rented in Guatemala. So I've played a fair amount on the Latin American North servers because of that. So I have played on the two major Western servers, and one minor server, which I feel like is fairly indicative of all of the wildcard regions, or the smaller servers at least, from what I've seen. And I've also coached people when I was in NA. Before I'd ever played in the US, I'd coached US players. I think that it's a lot more informative to play yourself than to coach people when looking at the regional differences, because those are the things that you don't really care about when you're coaching. And honestly, like I watch a guy play in Master 100 and I'm like, okay, well, your teammates are playing like Diamond 3s, but it's not like that happens. But when you play a lot of games, you notice trends. And I'm going to come out and say that neither region is better than the other one. Not significantly, at least. If anything, NA is a little bit better, but only marginally. I'm talking like a Diamond 350 in NA might be a Diamond 2-0. And granted, Diamond's so maybe like Gold 4 to Gold 2, these types of small differences possibly could just be my perception of it. But it does feel like EU is a little bit easier of a server. And by the way, we're only talking from low gold to Diamond 1 because these are the ranks that I've played at, and my observations of higher elos, especially in Europe, just aren't. I don't have enough of a sample size because I haven't seen that many games from European Challenger and the like. The main difference in playstyle is Europe is actually a lot more mechanical. This could be because of ping. I know Sven said in an interview that the ping in North America was a little bit annoying. Obviously, pros in NA play on 60 to 70 ping because they're in California and the servers are in Chicago. The pros in Europe are in Berlin because that's where the EULCS is, same as the NA, being in California. However, the servers are in Amsterdam, which is basically a light stroll, so it's pretty close, and we're talking about pros playing on 15 ping versus pros playing on 60 to 70 ping. Even in the non-professional scene, I feel like Europeans have slightly better mechanics, and I think that can be attributed to the lower ping because most of Europe does play on a lower ping than most of NA. Not many people in Europe are over 40. Lots of NA players are over 40. As far as how NA balances this out, I think it's obvious that they don't have the mechanics. I feel like they do have slightly better macro in any specific elo. It's not a lot. If you're a European player, don't feel like you're like, oh, I'm incompetent compared to an NA player of the same elo, and don't feel like if you're in NA that you're some like strategic god. Like both servers are way terrible at macro and just need to understand how the game is played in a very basic sense. And just incredible how good people get at mechanics while still knowing very, very little about the game. And of course that can be attributed to the way we learn League of Legends. It's mainly a mechanical game at first, and then we have to grow into more strategic players if you actually want to continue to climb, because it's two very different games. With that being said, NA is still a little bit better in the macro side compared to Europe. Now the small server, I was able to get Challenger within a few weeks on Latin America North. And for reference, I was casually hovering in Diamond 2 on the European server when I went over to Florida and got that Challenger. This can be attributed to the smaller population size. I believe this server is is smaller than 1/10 of the European server. In NA and EU are similar populations as far as accounts go. So when you look at these things, like, oh, top 200, oh, Challenger, oh, Latin America is a joke. No, it's just they have less people. Obviously, there's other factors that why Latin America will be worse, because they generally have poorer countries being represented. People don't have as nice gear, not as much time to play. There's a lot of reasons. But I think the biggest one is that the population size is smaller, because it turns out that actually matters a lot when we're talking about top 200. If you have, like, I've been ranked 2000 plenty of times, so if I'm in a server that's 10 times smaller, that's Challenger, because Challenger is top 200 no matter where you are. So for any of those servers, it's pretty easy to say it's bad because Challenger is so much worse, but you also have to remember that there's a lot less players. As far as toxicity goes, it's true Europe is more toxic. I think a lot of this is due to probably the fact that English is everyone's second language, and it is a game with so much negative energy around it. There's a lot of like heated arguments, a lot of people blaming, a lot of pride issues, and I think that this, when you say something jokingly or funnily to someone, it can really, like, there's more of a kinship in NA because everyone speaks the same first language pretty much, and people from Quebec speak perfect English anyway, so everyone speaks fine English, and it just, there's not going to be that many people that don't have the same exact culture as you. In Europe, there's cultural differences, and North Americans don't have a great history of putting aside cultural differences, so I think making fun of the European servers for having those is a little bit silly. If you don't know, French is a fairly common insult if you want to call someone bad, which I suppose I'm NA and French because I'm living here, so I suppose I'm probably the worst player that anyone could possibly have on their team based on memes. But the lack of English being a first language, giving the benefit of the doubt and attributing that to why the European servers are indeed quite a bit more toxic than the North American servers. Especially when you get to like Diamond 2, and Diamond 1. Just when you start like occasionally being dropped in a challenger game, playing with the same people every game, it's amazing how I can load into a game in Europe West and know 6 of the 10 people and be like, and the only reason I know those 10 people is because they're all on my ignore list. Like not just muted in game, like taking the time to block after a game. And I don't mute all that quickly. I tend to put up with some shit and just ignore them via the brain. But yeah, that can be kind of crazy to think about, how you know everyone just because they're toxic at a certain level. So those are the main differences between the two regions. I don't think there's really that much of a giant difference. There's still many of the same problems. Both servers, they don't have enough personal responsibility. That's why Eastern cultures will always be better than us at everything the fucking young Westerners try to do, because they actually they lose and they're like, what could I have done better, not like what could my team have done better. These issues are all the same. Honestly, the differences are not that big. I might not even have noticed if you dropped me in somehow to the other server with the same ping and the same, I might honestly not even know that I changed servers. So they're very similar. As far as the professional level, I think it's pretty obvious that NA's play style is more like the Koreans, and that leads a lot of analysts to say, well, they're better, but the EU tends to win out in competitive events, and if that's because of actually being better, then great. But there's also things that are like, track record doesn't necessarily always mean that they're the best team. It does feel a lot like I think TSM season 6 was probably the best team in Western history, aside from like season 2, Moscow 5, or CLG EU, and they completely choked during Worlds. They just did not perform. So European professional teams, they really don't look as disciplined typically, but obviously there is some track record behind it. If you're saying that NA is just a bunch of imports, that's kind of true, but the reason the European scene doesn't have as many imports is because they don't have as much money, and that's just because of viewership numbers, and really has nothing to do with the skill of any region. There would probably be some Americans going to Europe if there was enough money in the European scene to have people like that happen. And the reason that people take European imports instead of Korean imports is because they're much easier to work with as far as language goes and building team bonds go. So it's really kind of a silly thing to look at, and it's an even sillier thing to bring into solo queue and to say that like, oh well, I feel like if you're using any sort of regional, like, oh, I'm a plat in NA, I'm the best because top tier top lane guides, they said that we have better macro. Like, no, it's not. This stuff, there's still a lot of shit that everyone can work on to get better. And at the end of the day, they're very similar. Competitively, very similar strengths, I think. I think NA tends to look better every year, and EU tends to somehow pull a rabbit out the hat every year. Or NA tends to choke every year in competitive events. And there's a lot of analysts there's a reason analysts continue to say that, ooh, these NA teams look the strongest. But it just ends up not working out. Remember, it's still a very young game, so things that feel like guaranteed trends can always be broken in the future. Though I'm never gonna say the NA team's gonna beat the European team again, just because of track record. It's like saying SKT's gonna lose. Even if they look like they're gonna lose, like in season 6, you can't ever actually say that they're gonna lose, because you know that they. Like, I thought Samsung were the stronger team in Season 8 Worlds, but I was just like, at the viewing party I was at, they're like, who do you think's going to win? And I'm like, my mind says Samsung 3-1. Something about just the voodoo tells me SKT 3-0, but no, Samsung 3-0, so it does happen. And maybe NA will 3-0 Europe sometime in 2146 or something like that. Okay, so that's enough of my ramblings. I hope this actually told you something about the differences of the servers, if you cared at all. And again, don't let this feed your ego or make you feel bad. This is just some fun tidbits of information and from my experiences. All right, peace.